the Shadow Assistant Minister for Treasury. That is Dave Sharma. Dave, good to talk to you again. Big focus on climate and energy policy. I'll get onto that in a moment. But first up, the Prime Minister's overseas again. Now, as a former diplomat, you'd know how important it is for him to get to the ASEAN summit and the like. But not all of his travel has been necessary, has it? This bloke's out of the country more often than he's in it.
Look, he has been overseas a lot. He did go to the UN in New York. He did a 6-day trip to China but didn't stop in Japan or Korea. I do view these regional summits, so the Pacific Islands Forum, East Asia Summit and APEC, a little differently because they are regional forums where heads of government are and where Australia needs to be represented. But I think some of the other travel has been more discretionary in nature rather than these.
Yeah, too long in China. 6 days in China is too much. It's almost, it's just kowtowing. All that time at the UN to do a horrible thing, that is recognise a non-existent state. And I was surprised that he holidayed overseas. I thought you'd want to stick around when you've got some holidays in the country. I think that's a good advice for all Prime Ministers. But let me move on to other issues and the climate and energy debate. Now, we're getting all sorts of angles from the Nationals and the Liberals. Everyone's got their two cents worth on this policy. But what interests me is that it's coinciding now, this debate, with this Back Australia plan, and everyone's trying to support Australian manufacturing and Australian industry and buy Australian. There's an obvious link between these two issues. Everybody from every side of politics and all political ideologies wants to support Australian manufacturing. Well, you'll never get recovery in Australian manufacturing unless we lower electricity prices, surely.
I think that's right, Chris. And I think, you know, our energy prices were once a comparative advantage for Australia, an area where we were highly competitive. If you look back 20 years ago, for instance, our electricity prices were 1/4 that of Japan. Today, 20 years later, Japan's electricity prices are cheaper than Australia's. So if you want to think about why Australian manufacturing has been hollowed out, but also why any number of things is more expensive, from food on the supermarket shelves to the cost of clothing. You know, energy is an input into every economic activity of human life, and high energy prices in Australia, because of this mismanaged transition by the Labor government, are being felt by all of us and being paid for by all of us.
Isn't this the answer to the energy question, though? Isn't it that we should focus on price and reliability rather than focusing on emissions? Under the government's plan, under a lot of government's plans over the past 2 decades, it's been reducing emissions has been the #1 priority rather than providing affordable and reliable energy.
I think that's right. I think this Labor government has lost sight of those other objectives. They've pursued emissions reduction regardless of the cost, regardless of the impact, whether it's on rural communities or whether it's on the prices that people are paying. And they've lost sight of the fact that we are, you know, about 1% of global emissions. So whatever our emissions envelope is, it's not going to change global concentrations of CO2. Now, I'm supportive of technology that reduces emissions, provided it's cost competitive with the alternative sources. So I think we need to be technology agnostic here, as they say, and we need to be focused, laser focused on getting prices down.
Does that mean that you have to get rid of the net zero by 2050 target, though? I mean, there's a lot of focus in this debate on the term net zero, when really the issue is 2050, isn't it? Because if technology develops, and we all hope so, that the aim of being net zero, that is not putting any additional CO2 into the atmosphere than we take out of it, obviously, that's a good aim, but to say that we're going to have to do it by 2050 is the problem, isn't it? Because we're having to rush with all sorts of technology that is unproven.
Look, I don't have any problem with it as an aspiration, but I don't think it should be dictating policy, 25 years in the preceding period. I mean, yes, when the technology becomes available, when, things like direct air capture are commercially viable at scale, when carbon capture and storage is commercially viable at scale, when we've got alternative fuels for aviation, when we've got ways to lessen methane emissions from agriculture, then net zero will be possible. And, certainly we should be aiming in that direction, but I don't think we should be handicapping ourselves or putting constraints upon ourselves in the meantime to meet a goal for which the technology is not yet available.
Now, I want to dip into your expertise in foreign affairs again now as a former Australian ambassador to Israel, and this news that's been broken overnight from Israel, where Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, has named the man they believe responsible for the organising some of the attacks, the anti-Semitic attacks around the world, including here in Australia, such as the fire bombings of the synagogue, the Adass Israel synagogue in Melbourne, and also Lewis's Continental Kitchen in Sydney. Mossad say this is Sadar Amar was the commander in charge of all this. He's a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. This probably doesn't surprise us. But what do we do with that information now as a country? We've already expelled the ambassador. Is there anything further that Australia could do?
Well, I think this shows us two important things, Chris. One is the valued intelligence relationship with Israel. I mean, Israel has uncovered a network that has been used to target and risk the lives of Australians in terrorist attacks on our domestic soil. So the idea that we should be downgrading or diminishing that relationship, something the Albanese government has pursued, when that relationship helps keep Australians safe, is just unbelievable. I think it's been the height of irresponsibility by the Albanese government. The other thing is that something the Coalition has been calling on for well over 2 years now, the listing of the IRGC as a terrorist organisation, something the Labor government refused to do, something they're now promising to introduce legislation to enable to happen. We should have done this a long time ago because, you know, the proof is here, hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, the proof is here. They've conducted terrorist operations in this country. That's what these fire bombings were. So how long will it take to get them listed, and what difference will that make on the ground in Australia?
Well, I think the government is committed to introducing legislation this week. I've seen a draft of the legislation. Certainly, you know, the Coalition will cooperate with the swift passage of that legislation. As I said, I think it's happening later than it should be. We're shutting the gate after the horse has bolted, but it's an important step to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. And that will allow our intelligence and security and law enforcement agencies to basically be more proactive in monitoring the activities of the arms of the Iranian state and making sure that they are not planning or financing or fomenting further terrorist attacks on our soil.
Thanks for joining us, Dave. Appreciate it.